fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger, so
do the thing.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Hey, any youngers, it's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. I am so excited for this week's episode because it is with somebody who I personally admire, adore, look up to, have wanted to speak to for years, but never had the chance until now. I'm the most excited about this guest because she is somebody who is so honest and truthful and has opened up her struggles to the world through her writing, through her poems, through just being her true, authentic self. And I love the way she presents some of her life struggles in not only a relatable way, but in a way that helps you confirm maybe what some of the things that you're going through can feel like and will evolve to feel like. So I want to introduce you to this week's guest. Her name is Maggie Smith, and she is the author of 3 books of poetry, including the book Good Bones, which is also the name of her poem Good Bones, which went viral in 2016. I believe it won the best poem of the year in 2016 as well. Her latest book, Keep Moving: Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change, is a collection of essays and quotes that Maggie started a couple of years ago when she was going through divorce. She had this daily ritual where every day she would write herself a note to help her get through the struggles and the pain of what she was experiencing in life. And she took to Twitter, she posted those notes on Twitter, and at the end of every single note, Maggie ended it with the words, "Keep moving." Those notes are now put together, strung along with a collection of essays inside of the book, Keep Moving. I have the book. I keep it on my nightstand and I read it almost every night. I've read through it about 3 or 4 times already, and it's the kind of book that no matter what you're going through in life, where you are in life, there's something for you inside of it. Today's episode is brought to you by Jen and Juice Coaching by yours truly. For the past 5 years, I've worked with over 100 people to help them feel, well, less stuck. Whether you're looking to change careers, start a side hustle, or just get a strategy for your life, head on over to jenglantz.com/coaching and you can find out about my 1-hour coaching specials that will help you feel like you can finally cross those things off your to-do list and start whatever kind of project, life change, or dream that you have. I personally took to the book because over the past couple of years, I've gone through a lot of really personal hardships and trauma and all of this stuff that's been really hard and unique to process. And when you read someone's book like Maggie, who's gone through a myriad of her own traumatic experiences as well, it allows you to start to see that the weird, unique, and sometimes ugly ways that you process things are not so just unusual to you. It's also how other people process things as well. And Maggie does a great job of walking us through some of her experiences, from miscarriages to divorce. And in her book, she also tries to show some hope that even when we are going through struggles, we can walk out on the other end with a new life, with parts of us becoming even stronger. During this interview, I am crying. I actually muted myself and I am crying throughout the interview because some of her words just hit home so deeply. One of the things that Maggie and I agree on is the power of the word courage. Courage is a word that I've been obsessed with forever. I used to have all these necklaces I would wear that said courage on them to remind me to be brave and show up for myself. And Maggie talks about how that is one of her favorite words as well, and how it is so powerful to be the hero of your own life, to take risks, to accept failure, and to just go for things without any guarantee. Maggie and I also talk about feeling grief and joy at the same time and what that's like and how to deal with guilt during that. We also talk about how to find yourself and how to start again when the world shakes you, whether it's from a job loss or just a traumatic life experience or just the year 2020, how to start again and find what that thing was that you used to love and start doing that again. I have a feeling you're going to adore this episode. And if you do, it would mean the world to me if you could rate and review this podcast. Just scroll down as you're listening, give us a stars, give us some reviews. It helps me bring on more incredible guests just like Maggie. Also, check out her book, Keep Moving. You can find it linked here in the show notes. It's amazing. It's a great gift during the holiday season for a friend, a family member, or even yourself. Until next time, all my love, Jen Glantz.
Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I want to start off with my first question that I ask all of the guests. It's a little bit tricky and weird, but I am really excited to hear how you're going to answer it. How would you describe who you are and what you do to a person you just met at a party?
That's a great question. I feel like when you tell people you're a poet, one of the things that they ask first is like, people do that? Or what else do you do? So for many years, when people would ask, so sort of who I am and what I do, I would say, oh, I work from home, or I'm a writer, or I'm mostly parent. I would sort of give the self-deprecating answer. And a few years ago, I just decided to start owning it. So when people ask who I am and what I do, I say, I'm a poet. And if they have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. But I think that encompasses so much of who I am, not just sort of how I make a living, but how I move through the world, that it seems silly not to just say it.
And I appreciate that. I majored in poetry in college and I graduated many years ago, but even when I admit that to people, it does feel a little bit weird. You get laughs, you get questions, but I'm glad someone like you owns that title because you deserve it and it's a huge part of your identity. And I want to shift to talk about your book, Keep Moving. It has become my nightstand companion. I turn to it
Oh,
pretty much every night before bed just to help me calm down and feel good. But the book started as a daily ritual, a series of notes you posted on Twitter that all ended with the phrase, keep moving. And I want to ask you, what made you start doing this? What was the moment where you said, I am going to sit down and write these notes? And how did it feel when you started?
I was going through a really difficult divorce when I started writing these notes, and I didn't set out for it to be a book. I didn't even set out for it to be a daily practice. I just did it one day. That's always how we start. We start with one day at a time. And so one day in, I think, October of 2018, I wrote myself a little self pep talk, really. And I ended that little self pep talk with the words keep moving and posted it on Twitter, mostly just to kind of come out as someone who is struggling, because I think one of the issues I have with social media is that we tend to curate those spaces in such a way that make us look like we have it together. Like the background that you can see right now is fairly clean. What you can't see is the rest of my office. And there's a reason for that. And so social media is a lot like that. We show the like corner of our life that is clean and palatable. And we take pictures when, our under eye circles are camouflaged. And we don't often post when we're struggling. We don't post pictures of our sink full of dirty dishes. And so posting these every day was my way of saying, hey, I see you, I'm going through this stuff, and maybe you're going through different stuff, but we're all in it. And the response was such that it made me want to keep going with it. It helped me to have a kind of daily positive intention during a really difficult time. But seeing other people who were either going through divorce or a death loss or a changed job, or this was pre 2020, so we had pre-pandemic concerns. Seeing how other people found reassurance or comfort or hope in these also helped motivate me to keep going, and that's really how it grew into a book. So that's what people asked for.
You know, a lot of these notes, these pages in the book sound like conversations you had with yourself. And I know that when people go through a really tough time, a lot of the conversations they have with themselves are negative, are nasty, are mean. So, how were you able to shift that tone and change the way you spoke to yourself and wrote these notes?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because we deserve the level of compassion we extend so easily to others. And, if my best friend or my sister or my neighbor had been going through what I was going through and came to me, I would have said, "You are going to be fine. You have got this together. You're an amazing person. The future is so bright. I know you can't see it right now, but it's going to be okay." But that's not, unfortunately, often how we talk to ourselves. Our self talk is usually fairly unkind. And we tend to say, things like, well, if you were a different kind of person, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Or what did you do? Or what could you have done differently? And that is not helpful. So part of this project was trying to extend that level of compassion to myself and to be a little kinder and gentler to myself, because ultimately I think the most important conversation we have every day is the one we have with ourselves. And it needs to be, an honest conversation, but also I think a compassionate and kind conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And as a writer, do you feel like when you put the words down on paper, they shift the thoughts in your brain? Is there any type of process like that that maybe other people out there, once they get something on paper, it changes how you feel? Did you notice that with these notes?
Well, I often don't know what I think until I write it down. So if I'm really struggling with an idea, the easiest way for me, and I say easy, that's a little facetious because none of it's easy, but the best way for me to process my thoughts is to put them on paper. And I'm a handwriting person, so I'm a pen to physical paper person. I never actually learned how to type. So my brain and these two little fingers that do the work, it's not good. So yeah, I mean, part of daily practice too, I think, is the repetition of the thing. If you say something kind to yourself once, it's really easy to let that go. But if you make a point of getting up every day and finding something good to set your intention for that day, it I mean, what I found from experience, and I was pretty skeptical. I call myself in the book a recovering pessimist. What I found was that over time, it really did work to shift my thinking, and that telling myself, "You're going to be okay," and look up and look around, and these are the things that you still have and that are beautiful, and you're doing it. Telling myself that every day changed the way that I was thinking. It got me out of that old rut of a thought pattern, out of that old track, and into a more open space. And even though I was skeptical, it worked. So I do think whether it's writing or whatever the thing is that helps people feel most like themselves when they're going through a hard time. For me, processing on paper was helpful. Some people like to do their best thinking on a long distance run or on a road trip or while meditating or, while walking their dog. I mean, whatever, or while sculpting, whatever the thing is that helps you kind of clear the noise and get to that quiet, still place where you can really process what's happening. Making space to do that every day, if you can, I think it can only do good things.
Yeah, and I know that when you go through a difficult time, some of the first things that leave you are your passions, your hobbies, the things you love. You almost forget what those things even are. So, in your experience and in other people's experiences, what are some ways that people can go back to what are those things that made them happy? Because I know when you're suffering and you're going through such a traumatic experience, you almost forget anything that makes you happy. So, how do we even take that first step and start again?
I remember taking a walk in my neighborhood on one of my worst days and just thinking, I don't know how to do this. Because when we go through big life changes, so much of what happens is we start to sort of reconsider or feel like we're losing our identity. If you've always been a journalist, and then you lose your job, then who are you? And if you've always been a wife and mother and something happens to your family, then who are you? And so I remember taking a walk. I remember exactly where I was, about a block from where I'm sitting right now, and thinking, okay, I need to remind myself of who I am because I feel lost. And the thing that's going to help me is, even if it's only 10 minutes, doing something that reminds me who I am outside of this mess. Because that's the thing. When we get sort of myopic and claustrophobic in our thinking, and all we can think about is the problem at hand, that capital P problem, um, we start to slip. And so I thought, okay, what small foothold can I find today that will make me feel like me, the me that predated this problem? Um, because when if you lose your job, it's, I think, helpful to remember that you existed before that job. And when you lose your marriage, I think it's helpful to remember that you existed before that marriage. And so what is it that you can spend time doing that gets you back to yourself? And so I remember coming back from that walk and spending 10 or 15 minutes writing. I probably didn't get anything good, out of that 15-minute session. I don't think I came and like wrote my next poem. There was no like great masterpiece that happened, but just simply the act of reminding myself who I am outside of the trouble was useful. And so I know it's hard. I mean, it's hard to find the motivation to do anything when we're really suffering and when we're depressed and anxious. But sort of pulling ourselves up and doing like one small thing. Like if you don't want to go for a run because you don't have the energy, like put on headphones, and even if you want to listen to sad music, take a walk. There's always a baby step, I think.
I appreciate that, because I think a lot of people think when they're down or they're just going through a tough time, to get back to themselves, they have to go run that marathon. They have to write that next chapter of the book. But really, it's taking that step. It's just doing one thing and being so proud of that tiny little thing. And another thing that I know I personally struggled with, that I'm curious to hear if you've had to deal with this too, is days, hours, even minutes where you have felt two polar opposite feelings in one: grief and joy. And I know that when I was going through something so traumatic, I felt so guilty feeling joyful, just even if it was for 30 seconds in that same minute. So, what would you say to people who are going through a tough time and are feeling a little bit guilty or bad about feeling joy in these little pockets of their day?
Yeah, I feel that deeply. I understand the impulse, and I think that this year in particular, we're all in that space where there's so much suffering, and we want to acknowledge and need to acknowledge the suffering and the losses that people are experiencing, some of which I'm not at a place where I can fathom it yet. And yet, this life is a one-off. This is all we get as far as we know. I suspect this is it. So I, I think I have been living holding grief and loss in one hand and joy and gratitude in the other, for a long time, but certainly for the past 2 years. And I often want to set the grief down, but that's not really how life works. We have to hold it. We learn how to shift maybe the weight and carry it a little better, but we still have to carry it. It stays with us. I never want to put the joy down. I'm holding on very tightly and with that hand to the joy component of this, because that is what enables me to keep writing. It's what enables me to parent effectively. I knew really early on in this that if I wasn't going to be a functional human being, that my kids were not going to have a functional parent. And so, I don't think that we should feel guilty about experiencing joy, even in hard times, and even this year in a collective hard time, because we need it. That's part of what makes life worth living, is not just gutting it out, but having things that we, um, you know, recognizing what we still have, I think, is so important. And, I think about, when I lost my grandmother and how devastating that was. if I think about that, like she didn't want me to be sitting around um, mourning for months on end. And there are moments when I miss her terribly, and moments when I'm not thinking about it because I'm out having a snowball fight with my kids. And I think the people who love us and the people who have left us want the best for us, and would like to see us living our lives as fully as possible.
I appreciate that. And, one of the things that I loved in the book is when you talk about how you can go back and tell your younger self something, it would be to be brave, practice bravery, even if you don't feel it. So what is it about this word bravery? Because it seems like it does factor into you being able to appreciate joy even when you are going through grief. So what is it about that word and why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, bravery and courage. I've been thinking a lot about like what as a parent do I want to impart on my kids? Like if my kids grow up and they only are one thing because of my parenting, I would like that thing to be compassionate. But if I got a twofer, if I could choose two things that my children would grow up to be, it would be compassionate and courageous. And I don't mean courageous as in like superhero. I mean like owning their lives, making decisions for themselves, fighting for the kinds of lives that they want to live, being bold, not being scared to try. My little guy who just turned 8 just made student council, right? So he's his second grade student council rep. And we were talking about it and he was so excited. And he said, "Were you on student council?" And I said, "No." And it's not because no one voted for me. It's because I never put myself out there because I was scared that no one would vote for me and then I would feel rejected. And I'm so proud of him, not because he's the student council rep, but because he was just like, well, why not? Let's just go for it. And my daughter is often, is the same way. Like she's not afraid to put herself out there. We have a couple of mottos in our family, but one of them is why not? And I just think why not is a great family motto. And I think it speaks to that. It speaks to bravery and it speaks to courage, which is um, being a risk taker and not being afraid to fail, because we miss out on so many things when we only allow ourselves the chance at things we know we are guaranteed success at. That's a really narrow maybe there are no things we have guaranteed success at. So if we only try when we think we'll win, we're going to be sitting on the sidelines a lot.
Amen to that. Courage is one of my favorite words. I used to wear it on my necklace because I, like you, it doesn't come naturally to me either. I've had to always practice it, always show up. I was painfully shy, didn't have confidence. So that word to me as well is just so important. And Maggie, I could talk to you forever, but I want to end this with a question that I end all of my interviews on. So I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank.
Okay.
Are you ready for this? Okay, fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger, so
Do the thing.
I love that. That's simple and perfect and just summarizes what people should think about when they are living their lives. And Maggie, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your wonderful book.
You can find me when I'm not in this office. I'm on Twitter. So you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm at Maggie Smith Poet, so that I'm not confused with the Dame. I'm the other Maggie Smith. And the book Keep Moving is out from One Signal Press, Simon & Schuster. And my last book of poems, Good Bones, is out from Tupelo Press. And my website is maggiesmithpoet.com. So if you can find me. You can also find the other Maggie Smith on the internet if that's interesting to you.
Well, thank you. And we will make sure we link to the right Maggie Smith in all of the show notes for the show. Maggie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. This has been great fun.
Yay.
Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.